And AT, well, we talk all year long, and we talk college football, we talk a little NFL, even a little college baseball once we get into June.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, and not to pigeonhole you as a one sport guy or anything, because I know you're not. You're well balanced in everything you talk about. But I feel like this is Aaron Torres season once we're getting into college basketball. Is that right?
Yeah, it's interesting. This year I think with college football, maybe it's because of the LSU stuff where it feels like every single day there's a new story on LSU. It does feel like I'm behind the eight ball. I know I'm not because frankly, I think a lot of it, Phil, especially the three of us, because of what Arkansas is right now, we talk so much about the transfer stuff. So I'm really kind of looking at rosters into now June, July, and August as they're changing late into the summer. So I'm really not behind, but it feels like I'm behind, and it's just because obviously this time of year, any of us who cover college sports, college football takes up the majority of our time. But obviously, as football teams, as the season ends, as some teams continue to struggle, as interest fades, this is a great time of year to kind of get going on college hoops. Let me ask you, Phil. I need the scouting report. You were in the arena. You were at Bud Walton. I believe it was Bud Walton the other day. What's the scouting report on the Hogs right now?
Well, I mean, they weren't healthy enough, really, on the blocks, I think, to really get a sense of what they're going to look like during the regular season, because there was no Kamani Johnson. Trey Wade's not quite in shape yet, and Jalen Williams didn't play. But there's a lot of speed on this team, that's for sure. They're with J.D. Notae, with Chris Likes. I think defensively they're going to get a lot of steals, but I do think this is a team that will be able to rebound and play pretty physically down low once they get Williams back and once you get Kamani Johnson back. I think Kamani Johnson is back and practicing and might be ready to go against Mercer. But one thing that's interesting about this team that Muss is talking about, but this has to be a thing all throughout college basketball in the month of November, and more so than ever before, because you don't have to sit after transferring. And when you were a sit transfer, you're practicing with your teammates. You're learning the good and the bad about them. You're learning your team's offense. Now you get there and you play, or maybe you sit. So, November is always the weirdest month for college basketball because it's the first month. But it's even more weird now because you need these guys to find ways to mesh, and there's just not a lot of time to mesh. You know where I'm going with that?
100%, Phil. And I just think it's going to be a really interesting kind of thing to follow over the next, 3, 4, 5 years in college basketball, because there's a lot of programs, including the reigning national champion Baylor Bears, that really used that sit-out redshirt transfer year as part of the process with what they did. Obviously, Coach Muss did that a lot at Nevada. He did it a little bit at Arkansas, not as much with Note and Vanover sitting out his first year. But Baylor, I forget the numbers exactly, but Davion Mitchell, who was the best player in the NCAA tournament last year, transferred from Auburn and sat out for a year. Him and Maceo Teague sat out together. And I remember talking to Scott Drew about it when they were sitting out, and he's saying, you're going to love these guys. They're working so hard behind the scenes. We can't wait to get them playing. And then, by the way, last year Baylor had two other guys that were really important in what they did, Adam Flagler and JTT there, the big guy, who had sat out during the 2019-2020 season that was canceled early because of COVID. And so you look at a program like that, I mean, the redshirt year was very much a part of how they built their program. I have not talked to Scott Drew since then, but you look at somebody like them, how is that going to change what they do? How is it going to change a school like Virginia, which has had so much success in the developmental game? I did have Jay Wright on my podcast a few weeks ago, and he kind of said the same thing, is we're kind of reevaluating that process. One last one, I talked to Rick Barnes this summer, and he said, we almost, at this point, I tell my staff, we have to treat every player as if they're a one and done, knowing that with the one-time transfer, we have to keep a pulse on these guys. Are they happy? How do we, balance winning while also making sure guys get experience? So it is an ever evolving world in college basketball, and obviously Coach Muss, him using the transfer as much as he has through the years, he's continuing to evolve and develop as well as the rules change.
Yeah, Aaron, and there's some good matchups, to start off the season in week 1. Which one are you most excited for? I mean, is it Duke, Kentucky? Is it Villanova, UCLA, Texas, Gonzaga? Or is there one then that I'm missing?
Well, I think the one that I'm most personally intrigued by is Texas Gonzaga because, first of all, Mark Few's coming back from that grueling 3-game suspension that he's going to be in the middle of, just in time for the biggest game of the first week of the season. What a big coincidence there. But, Texas, listen, and I think it's only going to continue to be a conversation with you guys going forward as Texas gets ready to move to the SEC here in a few years. I mean, Chris Beard is, and I've said this, and I truly believe it. Chris Beard made a national championship game. He was a player or two away from winning a national championship at Texas Tech. He would have not left Texas Tech unless he was leaving a school that he believed could win national championships or compete for national championships every year. Now, I know historically we think of schools like Kansas and Kentucky and North Carolina as those kinds of schools, but I think he sees Texas as that kind of job. And it's funny, today I've been going through a lot of transfer stuff and rosters. Like I said, I put out a list of my top 75 transfers just for fun because that's what I do in my free time. And Texas has like 5 of the top 20 transfers in college basketball this year. So, you talk about a program, and I talked to Marcus Carr a few weeks ago, had him on my podcast. But Marcus Carr, all Big Ten guard last year at Minnesota, he's now kind of the leader of that team, but a ton of talent. But again, it's kind of like what we just talked about Arkansas. How does it all mesh? How does it all come together? Gonzaga, of course, losing a lot of guys off that national championship runner-up from a year ago. So to me, that's the most intriguing one. And then I think the great thing about that is that is a true road environment for Texas at Gonzaga. Hoping to get to that UCLA-Villanova game myself, so I'm hoping to see that one in person. But, yeah, there's a lot of great games, Drew, and it's crazy. If you look at kind of the out-of-conference portion from whatever it is, right before Thanksgiving, late next week, through January 1st, there are a lot of great games between a lot of great teams.
Oh, there definitely are. Back on the football side, though, because we still do have a month left of the regular season, and biggest news and biggest controversy and biggest outrage of the week has been the college football playoff rankings, and where Cincinnati is set, that Alabama is number 2 because they have a quality loss, and so on and so forth. What were your initial reactions to the first CFP ranking?
By the way, when you said biggest news of the week, I thought we were going back to Austin there for a second.
Yeah, there was we were going
Austin the other day,
other than Monkeygate, which we have been on top of.
Okay, very good, very good. I'm glad you guys have that covered wall to wall. This is great. So CFP playoff, what I would say is a couple things. One, I've been using this line a lot, but when I was a kid, my sister used to tell me all the time that I was my mom's favorite. And I said, what are you talking about? You're crazy. Mom loves us all equally. Then I saw Alabama ranked number 2 in the playoff poll, and I understood exactly what my sister was talking about. You talk about Michigan State coming off a top 10 win at home against a Michigan team that the committee believes is a top 10 team right now, undefeated, and Alabama's ahead of them. I mean, there's nothing else to say. I mean, the bias is real, and I do understand. Everyone wants to say, oh, it'll all get figured out in the end. Yeah, but we're supposed to be doing rankings based on what we know now, not based on what's going to happen on December 5th or whatever, and I don't believe that Alabama is the second-best team in college football right now. As far as Cincinnati's concerned, Drew, I know there's a lot of differing opinions on this. I don't think that they are the second, third, fourth best team that I have seen, but I think when you have a win that's better than anything that Alabama has done, a win that is better than anything that Ohio State has done, I thought it was completely unfair to start them at number 6. Now, the counter to that, people will say, well, it's the highest a Group of 5 team has ever started. But a Group of 5 team I don't believe that I know of has ever had a top 10 win on the road at this time in the year. And what I would also say is it felt like the committee was really setting things up where, one, a team like Oklahoma, if they keep winning, will eventually surpass Cincinnati. And then, 2, you could have losses in that top 5, and the committee can justify it by not dropping them past Cincinnati. So say Michigan State loses to Ohio State in a week or 2. We look at Ohio State was ranked number 5. Can't drop Michigan State. So I feel bad for Cincinnati. I also think some of this is on Luke Fickell. He can't sit back and be the, we're just focused on Tulsa. No, go out and defend your team, fight for your team, because I can already see the committee setting themselves up where they start moving teams ahead of Cincinnati, start moving, one-loss teams ahead of Cincinnati, all that kind of stuff. And I feel really bad for those kids in that program because they've done exactly what was asked of them. They played at Notre Dame this year, and they're still being punished for it.
Here's my analogy for what goes on between the College Football Playoff Committee and how they view Group of 5 teams. And just, take away any of the arguments of strength of schedule for these teams, who they've beaten and anything of that. They're Group of 5, and so they're lumped into a different category by the committee. It's like you're invited to a party, and you get yourself all gussied up. You get ready to go to the party. You go to the party, and you realize that the party that you've been invited to is the one in the garage, not the one in the house where everybody else is hanging out. You're like in the same vicinity, but you're not really viewed the same way. That's exactly how the committee views Group of 5. They're never going to make a playoff of 4 teams. Never.
Well, and Phil, first of all, on my podcast today, I talked a lot about this, is all of the things that have to happen. But it's so funny you say that, Phil, because I will tell you, I was never a proponent of playoff expansion. My whole thing is, why are we going to add more teams just so, we have just to watch Alabama beat another team by 40 points. But last year, my opinion changed, and a lot of it was due to the way that Cincinnati was treated last year, where I know nobody remembers besides me, but I talked about it at the time, where there was about a 3-4 week stretch where, because of COVID, Cincinnati had to miss a game or two, and they kept moving down the rankings, and Ohio State at the exact same time was missing games, and they somehow, Phil, always found a way to keep Ohio State in the top 4. And so I just said at that point, I said, look, if you're not really going to seriously consider them, then just don't put them on the list. If they just have, if there's nothing they can do, and right now, to your point, Phil, I think literally short of complete chaos, where we have just 3, 4, 5 lost teams all over the Power 5 conferences, at the top of the Power 5 conferences, outside of 2, 3 teams, they're not getting in. And that was my takeaway last year, was like, if you're not going to give them a serious consideration, don't even put them in the rankings, but to start them at number 6 and, they can play their way in. Well, let's see what happens when Michigan State loses to Ohio State. Are we really going to drop Michigan State behind them, or what's going to happen there? By the way, I heard something today about, if Alabama loses in the SEC championship game to Georgia, are we sold that they're going to drop Alabama that far? They started them at number 2 for a reason, and now they're setting it up perfectly where Alabama loses to Georgia. Well, they're the number 1 team in the country. Can't possibly not have them in the playoffs. And so it's so funny you bring that up, Phil, because I just remember this time last year, I remember having the exact same conversations where it's just like, if you're not going to seriously consider them, that's fine, but don't go through the song and dance of putting them in the top 25 and trying to convince us that they have a chance when they clearly don't.
Don't just pat them on the head and say, good job, little buddy.
Well, yeah.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
And why do you go to it's funny because that was another takeaway was, I'm glad they have Oregon ahead of Ohio State because head-to-head wins have to matter. But if you're Cincinnati, why bother going to Notre Dame if you're not going to get credit for it? Notre Dame is, by any tangible measurement, a better win for Cincinnati than any win that Ohio State has, than any win that Alabama has. And it doesn't even take into account the fact that a 7-1 Houston team couldn't get ranked in the top 25 according to this group, but a bad Minnesota team could. A decent but not great Mississippi State team, who I know Hogs fans will get familiar with, they somehow made it into the top 20. So, I've never been a yell. I love to yell and scream. Don't get me wrong, but I try to look at both sides of stuff. But everything that everybody says about how biased, about how unfair this committee is, it really is true. And I think all of what we're talking about is a microcosm of it that we saw on whatever it was Tuesday night when this first top 25 came out.
Aaron, we're up against it. We got to let you go, man. Appreciate you. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk next week. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, fellas. Have a great weekend. Woo pig.
Thanks, AT.
Aaron Torres.
We're back, and better than ever, a new web interface to start the basketball season and more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline remains your #1 spot for all basketball and football action this season. Head to the new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code BELIEVE50 to receive your bonus. That's BLEAV 50 to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, and baseball postseason, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts.